Marcus stared at the photograph in his trembling hands, the edges yellowed with age and singed by flames that had consumed half his life. The image showed a family barbecue, children laughing, adults raising glasses in celebration. But his eyes were fixed on something else entirely, a figure in the background, barely visible through the smoke of the grill, holding what looked like a gas canister. The figure was him, a version of himself he didn't remember. His reflection in the cracked mirror above the mantelpiece told a different story. Scarred skin stretched across his left cheek, the permanent reminder of the fire that had taken his family, his home, his memories. For 3 years, doctors had told him he was lucky to be alive. For 3 years, he'd lived with the guilt of being the sole survivor. But now, holding this photograph, Marcus realized something far more terrifying than surviving a tragedy. What if he hadn't survived it at all? What if he had caused it? The question burned deeper than any flame ever could. The discovery came by accident, hidden beneath floorboards he'd been replacing in his childhood bedroom. Marcus had returned to the burned shell of his family home for the first time since the fire, driven by a therapist's suggestion that confronting the scene might unlock his suppressed memories. The house stood like a skeleton against the gray sky, its blackened bones telling stories he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. As he pried up the damaged planks, his fingers found a metal box, untouched by the flames that had consumed everything else. Inside lay photographs, letters, and a journal, all in his handwriting, all describing events he couldn't remember. The entries spoke of arguments with his father, of feeling trapped, of a plan that grew darker with each page. The most chilling entry was dated the day before the fire. "I know what I have to do. They'll never understand, but maybe they'll finally listen when it's too late." Marcus felt the scars on his face throb as if the flames were licking at him again. Dr. Sarah Chen had been treating Marcus for post-traumatic stress disorder, but as she sat across from him now, clutching the journal like a lifeline, she saw something different in his eyes. The vacant stare of a victim had been replaced by the haunted look of someone carrying an unbearable secret. "These memories you're describing, they feel real to you now," she said carefully. Marcus nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "It's like watching someone else's life, but knowing it's mine. I can smell the gasoline, feel the weight of the match in my hand." The sessions that followed revealed a psychological conflict that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Marcus wasn't just recovering from trauma, he was uncovering the truth about who he really was. The boy who loved his family had also been capable of destroying them. The question that haunted him wasn't whether he could forgive himself, but whether the person he'd become deserved to exist at all. The investigation had been closed years ago, ruled an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring. But Marcus knew better now. He began revisiting the case files, studying crime scene photos with the eyes of someone who had been there, not as a victim, but as the perpetrator. Every detail aligned with his recovered memories. The point of origin in the basement where he'd stored the accelerant. The pattern of burn marks that matched his methodical plan. The timing that ensured everyone would be asleep. The investigators had missed it all because they'd been looking for an accident, not a calculated act of violence. But as Marcus pieced together the truth, another possibility emerged, one that made his blood run cold. What if his memories weren't returning? What if they were being implanted? The scars on his face began to itch, as if his skin remembered something his mind had forgotten. In the mirror, he watched his reflection mouth words he hadn't spoken. You're not the only one who survived. The first sign that something was wrong came during a routine grocery store visit. Marcus was reaching for a box of cereal when he heard a voice behind him, his father's voice, calling his name. He spun around, heart pounding, but found only strangers going about their shopping. The hallucinations grew more frequent and more vivid. His mother's laughter echoing from empty rooms, his sister's footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Dr. Chen suggested increasing his medication, but Marcus suspected something more sinister was at play. The memories weren't just returning, they were being manipulated. Late one night, he followed the sound of his father's voice to the basement of his apartment building. There, among the shadows and steam pipes, he found a figure that looked exactly like him, but unmarked by fire. The doppelgänger smiled with a face that Marcus remembered from before the flames. "I've been waiting for you to remember," the figure said. "Now we can finish what we started." The revelation shattered Marcus's understanding of reality. The figure, claiming to be his true self, explained that the fire had been no accident, no moment of madness. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan to escape a life that had become unbearable. But something had gone wrong. The explosion had been larger than expected, the escape route blocked by falling debris. In those final moments, as flames consumed everything he'd known, Marcus had split in two. One part of him had died in the fire, taking with it all the guilt and premeditation. The other part had survived, scarred but innocent, carrying only the trauma of loss. "But you can't exist without me," the unmarked figure continued. "I am your truth, your real self. The doctors, the therapy, the new life, it's all been a lie you've been telling yourself." Marcus stumbled backward, his scars burning as if the flames were returning. "You're not real, you're just guilt made manifest." The figure's smile widened. "Then why can you still smell the gasoline on my hands?" The confrontation with his darker self forced Marcus to question everything he'd believed about that night. Had he really been an innocent victim, or had the trauma simply allowed him to bury the truth so deeply that he'd forgotten his own culpability? The journal entries felt real, but so did his memories of waking up in the hospital, confused and afraid. Dr. Chen's notes revealed a disturbing pattern. In the early sessions, Marcus had described dreams of setting fires, of watching his family burn. But as treatment progressed, these dreams had transformed into memories of trying to save them. The shift had been so gradual that no one had noticed the therapeutic rewriting of his own history. The unmarked figure appeared more frequently now, sometimes sitting in his living room, sometimes standing at the foot of his bed. Each encounter left Marcus more uncertain about which version of himself was real. Desperate for answers, Marcus returned to the ruins of his family home one final time. In the basement, where his recovered memories placed the origin of the fire, he found something that made his blood freeze. Scratched into the concrete wall, barely visible beneath years of soot and debris, were words in his handwriting, "I am not sorry." The message was dated the day after the fire, written in what appeared to be his own blood. But Marcus remembered nothing of returning to the house, nothing of leaving this confession. As he traced the letters with his finger, the unmarked figure materialized beside him. "You wrote that while I was in the hospital. The part of you that survived the fire, the part that remembered everything. But you couldn't live with the truth, so you buried me along with them." Marcus felt the scars on his face burn again, but this time the pain felt different. Not like the memory of flames, but like the slow healing of a wound that had never properly closed. The final twist came when Marcus discovered that the unmarked figure wasn't a hallucination at all, but a manifestation of his disassociated memories trying to reintegrate. The fire had caused more than physical scars. It had fractured his psyche, allowing him to compartmentalize his guilt so completely that he'd forgotten his own actions. But the mind has a way of protecting itself, and Marcus's had created an elaborate fiction to preserve his sanity. The loving family memories were real, but so were the feelings of rage and desperation that had driven him to violence. The innocent victim and the calculating murderer were both him, existing in the same wounded psyche. As this realization dawned, Marcus felt the walls between his fractured selves beginning to crumble. The unmarked figure began to fade, its purpose fulfilled now that the truth could no longer be denied. But with integration came a terrible choice: accept the full weight of what he'd done, or retreat back into the comfortable lie of victimhood. Standing in the ruins of his family home, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't continue living as half a person, denying the parts of himself that were too painful to acknowledge. The boy who had loved his family and the young man who had destroyed them were both real, both him. The scars on his face no longer burned with phantom flames, but with the weight of accepted responsibility. He walked away from the house for the last time, not as a victim seeking closure, but as someone who finally understood the full scope of his actions. But the story doesn't end with acceptance. As Marcus drove away, he caught a glimpse of movement in his rearview mirror. A figure standing in the doorway of the burned house, watching him leave. The figure raised a hand in farewell, and Marcus realized with chilling clarity that integration hadn't eliminated his darkness. It had simply taught him to recognize it, to live with it, and perhaps most terrifyingly, to control it. The truth about Marcus raises disturbing questions about the nature of identity and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. Was he a victim of his own fractured psyche? Or was the integration of his memories simply the final step in a manipulation that began the night of the fire? The line between psychological healing and self-deception remains terrifyingly thin. This twisted story of repressed memories and fractured identity shows us that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one we refuse to see in the mirror. If this mind-bending psychological thriller left you questioning the nature of truth and memory, hit that like button and share your theories in the comments below. Do you think Marcus was truly innocent, or was his recovery just another form of self-protection? Subscribe for more dark secrets and psychological mysteries that will keep you awake at night. There are more stories like this waiting to unravel the hidden corners of the human mind. Till next time, stay kind, stay sharp, and stay curious.